Hey there, players of all classes. Today, I want to talk to you about something that I've definitely talked about a whole bunch in previous videos in all different kinds of series, but it's my strategy for taking notes for D&D.
How do you even start DMing? It's so scary. There's so much to learn, so much to worry about. So you start learning, making your own notes. Then you finally play, and this is where the real learning and processing takes place. And after the game, the cycle starts anew.
Before I get any further with notes, I just want to say I am primarily a physical DM. I like to play in person. I just feel like the vibe is better in person. And let's face it, I have so much stuff for D&D in person that I gotta find a reason to use it. That being said, these tips may or may not be helpful to you. I mean, you can pretty much adapt them to what you're doing as well when you're playing digitally. You could still do sort of the same thing. You could even have just aids that are physical. But a real big part of how I write my notes these days is color coding them. All right, so as I'm sure you've seen in many of my other videos, most of my stuff for D&D has a whole bunch of tabs like this. I use tabs to break down exactly what this information is so that from a glance I can be like, oh, I know where this is. Or if I know the book that it's in, or if I know that something's going to happen, because in addition to just tabs, I also use index cards that are colored for much the same purpose. My schemes are always the same for colors. Granted, you can choose whatever colors you want. This is just the way I break it down. And the way I break it down is if it's green or blue, that means it's either something story related where I could use it as a story beat, or like this has to happen before this happens, or spells, like homebrew spells that I've come across that I want to use later. Granted, I should have probably separated spells and information, but at the time I only had green tabs, so that's what I started with. These are actually blue tabs, which means these are not the tabs I started with. This is something that I reviewed recently, so I have different colored tabs. But blue and green is for story related items or homebrew spells that I want to take a look at. Yellow, which you see a ton of here, are treasure or items. This doesn't necessarily have to be magic items. It could just be other things. And I will even use a yellow tab or an index card if it's something that like my players could interact with. If it's part of like a monster stat block that I want to be like, oh, that's a cool thing. Like say a Lich's phylactery sort of thing. That might end up being an item, like something that my players could interact with more so than the creature that I want to use. And for creatures and monsters, any kind of evil thing I want to fight or people I want my characters introduced to, I will use red tabs because that makes the most sense. Like red is the universally regarded color for combat and what have you. I try to do this with pretty much everything that I go through that is D&D related, but if I also have a digital version of the book, for example, Gemhammer Grimoire I do not have a digital version of, so I couldn't do this. But other things like the Fate Forge books, I often also keep a list on my computer of what page these things are on. But I just think tabs like this help me when I'm like, oh, I know there's something in Gemhammer Grimoire that I wanted my players to interact with. How am I going to find it? Oh, I just check the tabs. I also have all of my tabs for whatever book now going in one direction, and then I will say which page the item or the creature or anything is on with arrows. If it's an arrow pointing to the left, that means it's on the other page on this 2-page spread. Having the tabs turned backwards means I have to turn the book backwards, and it's just a pain in order to look for something that I want to find. I don't recommend that. Come up with your own system to say like, oh, it's on that page or this page. If you want to, you don't necessarily have to do that. You could just say, hey, open the book to here and then look. That works too. Now, this also applies to my own notes. So this is my D&D campaign notebook. It is a Jurassic Park The Ride notebook that I got so many years ago. And I was like, I'm going to use this. So I did. And these days, there's tons of tabs in it because originally I was just marking things down as we were going. And then I realized, oh, I'm running out of space. This campaign is going way longer. I've been running my campaign for more than 4 years, so I had to go back and start filling in gaps that I made. And then I realized, oh, hey, I will eventually run out of space in this book. There's no way that I'm not going to. I thankfully can say the DM Lacara actually got me a gold dragon themed journal that I will be using after this book is full, which I'm almost at the end. And before I tell you exactly how my index cards work, I will say that there is actually an entire system as opposed to like a TTRPG system called Index Card RPG. And it is very, very simple. And you can for sure apply some of those principles to your own note-taking ideas. But I will say that if you keep your tabs and your index cards the same colors, it 100% will help you on the fly when you're working on stuff. So I supplemented the space in this book with my own index cards, and they are also color coded. Same idea. I'm trying to make sure I don't grab one for something that has not yet happened in my campaign. That's in case my players watch this video. So give me 1 second to grab some index cards that are in there that won't spoil anything for my players. Okay, like I said, I keep the colors the same. So just a quick catch up on some background lore that's happening in my campaign. I run the Saruk, which are currently, if you're in like 1492 or some year like that in the Forgotten Realms, they are liches but they were originally the original snake folk, a very, very early race, and they live in the Anarok Desert currently as liches. Well, live is a relative term when you're the undead, but canonically, they do live in the Anarok, and they are trying to make sure that the Faerûn don't get out of their demiplane prison. So I have in my world these, we'll call them training grounds that the Saruk set up way, way, way back when. If you started in Lost Mines of Phandelver or the Essentials kit, you will probably be familiar with Lylon in the Forgotten Realms, which is a little port town a bit far north of Waterdeep, but it is on that road that leads down across the Sword Coast. It's just above, or technically like just on the precipice of the Mirror of Dead Men. And canonically, there is Thalavar's Tower in Lylon. And canonically, when the Spell Plague happened, it went crazy. It caused all the golems that were supposed to protect the town to destroy the town. And the tower gets knocked down, yada yada. In my world, however, that tower is much older than just some human wizard. It was a Saruk tower, and there's a reverse tower, yes, a la Castlevania, underneath it, that is basically a training ground for the Saruk to take on the Faerûn. And the starting couple floors of it, before you get down to the bottom, are trials that someone has to endure before they can get down to like the command center, HQ type area at the bottom. And the very first floor on it, a trial to overcome your fear of the unknown. And so this is a red card, meaning that there is combat here. But the way that I run it, it's not necessarily combat. Like, you could try fighting in the fear of the unknown, but this is more of an encounter. So my encounters and my combats both pop up on red cards. And I just pop one of these out. This one in particular has what the guardian of this trial does and how players can interact with it. And I wrote this up before my players actually went through it, so there's a lot of stuff I got to add to it before I start publishing it as its own little adventure sort of deal. But the top does have HP counts for creatures that were sort of accidentally spawned because this trial has been locked away for so long. So there were some semblance of combat encounters here, but this ended up on a red card. And this is for an encounter, not necessarily a combat. So those are a little bit different for me. But the basic gist is combats or encounters pop up on red cards. And then I have the first trial's rewards, which probably when I publish this will be handed out to everyone. But because this is supposed to be a non-combat encounter, the Saruk had everyone put their weapons away because you're just supposed to be conquering the unknown. You're not supposed to be fighting anything, so you put your weapons away. And I made a set of weapons that the Saruk would use to combat the Faerûn, and the reward for it is the +1 version of that weapon, the Glaive of Confusion. If you want to know more about the Glaive of Confusion, I can show you the stat block on D&D Beyond. Just leave a comment below, and I will do that. So that was red and yellow cards. Now, this red card specifically, I could have made this a green card because technically it is something that my players interact with. It's story related. I could have done that. Now I have a green card. So if you played the Essentials kit, one of the starter missions in it is Butterskull Ranch, which I adapted in my campaign. Big Al got kidnapped. He does normally get kidnapped, but he got kidnapped by my goblinoid army, and my players tried to save him. He actually ended up dying, but it was kind of their fault, kind of not their fault. This is a green card for all the information that I needed to know of how that quest was going to interact with my campaign. So on here, I've got stuff like, oh, the goblins have Big Al. Another character that got kidnapped along the way, I finally gave him a health amount because he's never actually fought with the party, and I didn't have any reason to give him health, but now I did because he's here. I also had to write down who was going to be enemy-wise, like it was a big platoon that broke up to capture Big Al, versus who my players were actually running into, so I had to separate that. They're on here. This means that, yes, sometimes I put enemy health on here, but more often than not, the green cards end up being just stuff that's going to happen. I'm not really using this for combat, but I might write down their health just in case I forget it, or they've been injured in combat, and on the combat card I've scratched out what their health is, what their max health was. So it's good to have a backup just in case. And this also tells me what kind of items and stuff the people have on their persons, and maybe I'll make a yellow card if I think my players are going to get to interact with those items. When it comes to actual enemies, though, for red cards, I highly suggest, if you do plan on putting enemy counts and stuff on here, and how much health those specific enemies have, do leave space, as you can see here. Do leave space to start crossing it out if you're going to manage their health on the cards, because originally a big problem I had was I would list everybody's health right in a line, and then I'd have nowhere to put their changing health amounts. If you're running paper, you need somewhere to do that math and to keep things intact, because you don't know, maybe they'll get healed, and now you have to worry about how much health they have max. So it's good to definitely leave space between health pools for different enemies. You want to be able to cross it off. If you're using a calculator or something on the side, maybe you don't have to do that, but I think it's a good idea to keep the health in one spot where it's easily referenced. I also recommend on these cards, if you do have a group fighting, at the very bottom of here, I have reaction crew and legendary actions. So if creatures have legendary actions, listen, when you're DMing and there's a ton of monsters on the field, everybody forgets about stuff. So I highly recommend at least putting somewhere else just a separate section of like, these guys can react. These guys have legendary actions. Just so if you have this card in front of you, you can be like, oh yeah, it's the end of your turn. It's the end of one of your players' turns. You look over, you're like, hey, your turn just ended. This guy's going to legendary action. He's going to do something in between your turns. I recommend having that on hand rather than trying to read the stat block on the fly, being like, where is it? Or realizing that they don't have, or they do have reactions. Sometimes you miss that completely when you're staring at the stat block because you're looking at other stuff. So I recommend writing those two things specifically down just in case you forget them. We all know in TTRPGs, 5e specifically, combat is basically glass cannon versus glass cannon. So maybe these creature stat blocks have like a million things on them, but chances are they're going to get to maybe 2 or 3 of those. So something I've seen the Dungeon Craft channel, that creator do, and I also do something similar, is if a creature has a huge stat block, you might just want to write down like, this is what this creature does first turn. This is what this creature does after that. On one of these red cards specifically. That might be super helpful for you when you're running the game. So you can just be like, oh, it's round 1 of combat. He's going to do this. Boom. And then round 2 of combat comes around. If he's still alive, which chances are your players have probably tried to murder him, somebody's glass cannoning somebody. Oh, round 2, he's going to do this. And then one other trick, especially if you have a really big combat, one other trick that I've come across that I use in my red cards now every once in a while is I put a 1 or 2 sentence description of the motivations or like what this one character wants. When my players fought their second big battle on Idle Island, which is off the coast of Lylon, there was a ton of creatures in that combat, and I was thinking on the fly, I just want to speed this up. I want to be able to make this combat go as smoothly as possible because we had a ton of combatants on both sides. It was my players, the Echo Seekers. They had their 7 people. Some of them have pets, so they have to do those turns. And then they called in reinforcements, so we had to run those NPCs. And then the Goblinoid platoon was like 15 creatures, and only like 2 or 3 of them had basically the same stat block as one another. So we had a Goblin Bomber in there, and just his motivation was super simple for this battle. I just wrote on this, Goblin Bomber, get cart in order. Now, that's not his abilities, that's not anything, but on the fly, a player is going at this point, and I'm like, oh, okay, cool, you go. And this Goblin Bomber was on deck. I would look at this card and be like, this guy's motivation is he wants to get the cart in order. Me reading that one sentence, maybe this doesn't help everybody, but me reading that one sentence of motivation jogs my memory into thinking, oh, this guy on his turn, he just wants to get this cart in order, which means he's going to do as much as he can to either get onto the cart or to activate this cart. I reused something from Dungeon in a Box. They have like a Goblin War Wagon, and it's got launchers and stuff that I edited for my campaign. It has like a tackle ability, and technically you can apply magic to it to get it to charge people without any kind of propulsion mechanism. You can basically add magic to it and it'll... And so this Goblin Bomber guy was like, yo, I got to get to that. So when he would be coming up to plate, I'd be like, oh, I read this, he gets the cart in order. He's just going to do whatever makes the most sense for him in this instance to get to the cart, make the cart work. That being said, maybe that's not what helps you, and you want to go for the first round they do this, second round they do this. That's totally fine too. They're going to be your cards. They're going to be your tabs. So you can go set them to whatever you'd like. Well, now you players of all classes have a pretty good grip on how I set up for my campaign. So I want to know from you, how do you set up for your campaigns? What is your method of note-taking? What is your strategy? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to chat with you about it. And if you'd like to talk with more than just me as a fellow DM, you can come hang out during DM Roundtable every Monday night at 8 p.m., barring emergencies or certain holidays. Me and a couple other DM friends of mine get together and chat about homebrew stuff. We're starting to talk about things that we're making and disseminating to the public. So please come join us for that. If you just want to talk D&D, you can watch it on this channel, or you can come on Twitch because it's dual streamed every week. Come on, whatever you want to do. Come on. And also, please do the regular things. If you like what you saw, leave a like. If you want to see more content like this, sub. And I will see you players of all classes again in the next one. And if you're feeling extremely generous and you are able to, please, I'm not forcing anybody to do this, you can also help me out monetarily by using some of the links in my description below, like my eBay affiliate link, my Amazon affiliate link, or you can become a member of this YouTube channel right here. You'll get early access to videos, and depending on your tier, you also get access to my homebrew repository, which is where I digitally keep a collection of all the things that I would allow in a campaign that I was running, plus my BGM list for TTRPGs. You may not have the same collection of music as me, but there's plenty of ways to get music out there. A lot of them are royalty-free tracks anyway. I would recommend that if you're watching this on YouTube. You can also become a patron on Patreon and get very much the same rewards minus the early access to videos on YouTube. It's up to you. Any way helps. Listen, anytime you want to help me out,
come on, push the button.
Yeah, come on, push your button.